In this lesson, we'll start to work on adding some secondary illumination to help our image-based lighting that we set up in our previous lesson. Okay, so here's where we left off as far as our overall illumination result is concerned. Pretty good for a starting result, but still quite a bit of work to be done as far as really making this look realistic and making this look a little bit more integrated into the rest of our scene. So let's come in, and what I'd like to do is when you're in the process of lighting, what you really want to try to do is get results and get feedback as quickly as possible. So anything that you can start to do to speed up your renders is really going to be beneficial for you. So what I'd like to do is temporarily take these different particles and really turn these off. So that way at least they're not being calculated and really not necessarily slowing down our renders any more than we need to. So what I can do is go into our particle, and let's just temporarily disable those. I'm going to do the same for both my particles. There we go. And so that way as I play through, those are no longer being calculated. So that will kind of help speed up our renders quite a bit. The fact that Mental Ray won't necessarily have to calculate shadows and things like that through these particles. At least not yet, not while we're still in these really early stages. Really the idea now is that we want to get really fast feedback, really fast results, so that we can tune and make adjustments as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's come in and start to add some kind of secondary illumination. So this image-based lighting is doing a pretty good result, but typically you don't want to use this strictly on its own. You usually want to use this image-based lighting as sort of a companion to a real direct light source. So as we learned in one of our earlier lessons, a good light source to use for something like a sunlight would be our directional light. So let's come in, click on this to drop that in. Now it drops my directional light down at the origin. Now this scene is actually modeled in a very, very large scale, which means my light is teeny, teeny, tiny. So in a situation like this, what I will typically do is grab my directional light, grab my scale tool, and just scale that up, so that way it makes this a lot easier to grab and manipulate. Scaling the light will not change its illumination at all, at least not with this directional light. There are some lights, like the area light, where scaling the light up will significantly change the actual lighting that is coming from that particular source. But for the directional light, we don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to come in and just try to aim this light. You can see sort of our arrows here that indicate where that light is pointing and what direction it is. I'm going to try to just roughly line that up to where I think the sun would be. Again, as we learned in one of our earlier lessons, the placement and positioning of this directional light really doesn't matter at all. The only thing that we have to concern ourselves with is the angle or the orientation of that light. Okay, so let's come in and see what that's done for us. So we can take a quick render. Okay, so now we have some direct illumination in here compared to what we had before, and actually we forgot to save a render for comparison, but that's okay. You can definitely tell that we do now have some direct illumination in here, and one of the benefits of having this direct light source is the fact that we can start to get things like shadows with this particular light. So if I play through maybe just a few more frames, and let's maybe take a render of this from a different angle, so that way we can actually see sort of the shadows that we should now be getting along the ground. You can start to see those right in here. Okay, very nice. Now these shadows are coming from my directional light. So let's maybe take this directional light and angle it maybe a little bit more to the side so we can get maybe some more of those shadows that kind of come out maybe from this angle. Let's take another render. Okay, so we now have what I feel are fairly decent shadows in this area. We can always come back and tune those a little bit more. But right now I would say my main point of concern, the main thing that I'm looking at, is the fact that this scene still feels a little bit dark, especially if you compare sort of the illuminated areas of his body to some of the illuminated areas of the building behind him. So that tells me that we probably need to take our light sources and make these a little bit stronger, a little bit more intense. So let's take this directional light and let's maybe just try maybe an intensity of 2. And let's just see what that does. What we can do is maybe instead of re-rendering the entire scene, what we can do is come in here and just draw a small region And now we can just render that little region instead of waiting for the entire image to finish rendering. This can be a little bit easier and a little bit faster way of tuning things. Now, with this, I feel like that's almost a little bit too bright, so maybe a value of 2 is a little bit too strong. So let's maybe take that, and I'll just try to move this over so we can have room for both. Let's maybe try bringing that down to something a little bit lower, like 1.5. Again, just maybe re-render that little region. Okay, that's feeling a little bit more balanced now. Again, this is always easy to kind of come in and tune. Now the directional light, or my direct illumination, is feeling pretty good, but overall maybe in some of these darker, kind of shaded areas, it does still feel a little bit dark, especially, like I said, if you compare some of the shadows in kind of these back areas to some of the shadows that we get here. You can tell they're definitely quite a bit darker. So that tells me that we probably need to bump up the intensity of our image-based light. So to do that, let's go back into our render settings. Let's go to our indirect lighting tab, and we can start to come in here and bump up the overall intensity of our final gather result. Remember, the final gather is sort of our indirect illumination that's being generated from this image-based light that we had plugged in. So to start to increase the strength of our indirect illumination, we can take this primary diffuse scale of our final gathering, and right now that's set all the way up to a value of 1. But what we can do is start to overdrive this. So let's say maybe we want to give that a value of 2. Essentially what that will do is now double the intensity of our indirect illumination. So let's come in and take a look at that. There we go. That's looking actually quite a bit better now. So let's see what that looks like with the rest of the scene. Okay, very nice. So we're off to now a pretty good start as far as our overall illumination is concerned. Now before we wrap up this lesson, let's do one last little thing. Let's try to take some of the shadows from this area right in here. Let's try to soften those up a little bit to kind of better match up with some of the shadows that we have back here. You can see that these are just a little softer and a little bit more diffuse. So to do that, we're going to go to our directional light. We're going to scroll down. We're going to look for the shadows rollout. Let's open that up. We're going to scroll down, and by default we're set to use ray trace shadows, which is good. That's what we want. But now we can start to take this light angle, and by increasing this, we're basically going to start to introduce more softness into the light itself. So let's come in here, and once again, let's maybe just render out this little region. So draw a region around there. Let's see what this is going to look like. So there we go. Definitely added some softness. In this case, probably a little too much softness. So let's see if we can't sort of get that a little bit more under control. I'll try to work both of these in as best I can. So let's maybe try to take this light angle, and let's maybe try dropping that a little bit more than half. So let's take another quick little render. Give this just a second. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. I still think that's probably a little bit too much. So let's now bring that light angle back down a little bit more. There we go. There we are. I think that's feeling now a little bit better and a little bit more manageable. Now, one thing that you'll start to notice is when we start to introduce a little bit more softness into this, we get a lot of noise around the shadow. Now that could be fixed by introducing more shadow rays. So let's maybe take this up to something like 10. Again, we can save this for comparison if we want. Give that just a minute. There we go. That's going to look quite a bit better now compared to what we had before. So now that gives us just a little bit softer, a little bit more kind of realistic shadow in here. Okay, very nice. So our basic illumination is off to a pretty good start now. So what we'll start to do in our next lesson is focus on the process of starting to get some of our substance textures back, which is something that we had mentioned in one of our earlier lessons that we had lost due to the fact that we are now rendering with Mental Ray. So we'll learn how we can start to fix that problem in our next lesson.